Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you might see a little link down below. You can register to join us in Zoom. From there, once you're in Zoom, you'll see another link where you can click and you'll be able to join us in Mukana. And from there, you'll actually become one of our producers. There you go. That's what happens when the screen is too large. You can hear me listen to myself. Anyway, if you think you can answer some of these questions, this is how you get in. If you think you can answer some of the questions, you can join us as early as 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to check the mic checks. But generally, we start at 7 o'clock. General questions. You can the questions are pretty much anything, media, virtual production, anything in that area is general questions at 7 o'clock. Second hour is specialized for something we think is interesting that we want to check a little more out. Today we're going to have Andy Hayes on from Monogram, and Monogram is a piece of hardware. It's actually really cool that you can tie into some of your software so that you have kind of a more analog control over different things. And I've been playing around with it for a couple weeks. And I like it. So we're going to have them on, answer some questions and show how it works. And answer your questions. And so anyway, so that's coming up. Of course, Education Hour is tomorrow. And Emily Russo is now hosting the Education Hours, 9 to 11. I'll still be there, but she's taken over. So she's going to be doing that tomorrow, 9 to 11, and we'll all join and talk about education at that point. All right, Bill, let's jump into the questions.
Okay, our first one comes from Gordon Lake, who is in Los Angeles, and Gordon inquires about lavalier microphones. He says, are lavalier microphones a good option for Zoom meetings? And if so, are there any recommendations about them?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd say that if they're hardwired, they're not a very good choice because you're going to pull that My Big Fat Greek Wedding where you got to walk away and get yanked. You always forget that you're wired when you get comfortable in Zoom. So I do have a wired one here that's a USB-C one that you might want to check out from Sennheiser XS Lab. I think it's around $79 for one of those. But like I said, I always forget that I have it on and I wind up ripping it off at the last second. So I'd go wireless. Like the wireless Go is a good option.
Go ahead, Bill.
You're always going to be fighting the fact that if you want the best possible sound, you try to get a microphone as close as possible. And a lavalier is typically worn 7 or 8 inches down. And you might not think that's a big difference from something like a head-worn mic or addressing a large diaphragm condenser directly. It actually does make a qualitative difference. Now, there are some very good lavaliers that are full range and sound great, but it depends on the kind of circumstances you're in. And I'm going to go along with Guy about you forget they're on and you walk away and pull something off a table. You'll try to find at least a wireless body pack, if not something that's a little more stable.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I don't use a lav mic, but if you wanted to use one and stay wired, you could get like a belt pack preamp and then have a long coiled cord, which is what I do. So for my earpiece, so if I walk away, I can kind of feel it tugging on me, but I don't pull anything crazy off the desk.
I will say from a sound perspective, I'm not that excited about lavs. If you close your eyes and listen to almost anything on air where they're wearing lavs, you're actually gonna, you don't see it when you're watching video. When you close your eyes and listen to it, you'll actually notice that you're hearing a lot of the room, even on a professional environment. It's kind of hollow, and so you can use them, and we've used obviously for hundreds and hundreds of shows. But my preference, one of the things that we've kind of done is try to remove the stigma of seeing a mic. So a headset mic or a radio mic in front of us, I think is really advantageous to making sure that the person on the other side can really hear what you're saying and get the full quality of that. I actually think that the more we remove the background audio, the more we reduce cognitive load on the listener. And so when we're filtering out all of this stuff that we're thinking over, the virtual backgrounds, bad audio, bad lighting, all those things, those are like little tension points in our mind when we're talking to other people. And I think one of the reasons that we can do this for so long here is because our audio and our video and everything else is very good. And so it's very high quality and it's easier to do it for a long period of time. And so I think that we always want to kind of keep that in mind as we kind of build the system. Next question.
Comes from Chirigita in Dallas, Texas. And Chirig says, in testing Zoom yesterday, we found a participant who was spotlit in Zoom can unspotlight themselves in both a meeting and a webinar. Has anyone else seen this? Is this a bug or a new feature?
I personally think it would be a feature. I mean, I think that someone who's getting spotlit doesn't want to get spotlit should have the ability to unspotlight themselves. so I think so I actually think that's probably a feature that they probably added in it. My guess, I don't know for sure, but I would guess that that's actually something that would be preferred by users. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, just to say, of course, if the person is a co-host, they can unspotlight themselves.
Ah, there you go. That could have been as well. I mean, one of the things that I think that is a key missing thing with Zoom in general is for the panelists to be able to lock their view. And even for the users to be able to lock their view. I think that this is I don't quite understand why we don't have that. Is that when we're as a panel, I want to say I always want to see the gallery, or I want to see however I set it up, and it doesn't matter what anybody does. Because right now, if someone spotlights, it takes over all of our screens, and then you'll see all of us click away because we can't see anything after that. It just kind of blinds us. So next, go ahead, Guy.
Can we test it just to make sure that that's what's going on? Talalok, like tone loc, right? With that oak at the end, if I remember right. Can we test it just to spotlight somebody? And I do not see anything that says remove spotlight if I'm not a co-host. Yep, I do not see something to remove it as a non-co-host. So if you make me a co-host, I'm sure I can remove it because I do remember that being the case. So
it seems like it sounds like it's a co-host versus panelist thing. Yeah, makes sense. Next question. I can't hear you.
Craig, I'm sorry. Craig Kadoke is up next. And Craig, if I can get my mouse, there we go. So today Zoom is showing live transcript button. What is the process in enabling it? Is it available for all Zoom accounts? Is there any subscription needed at the back end settings?
In the back end, I had to enable it, like that transcripts can be used, and then it's available in it's as the host or the co-host or whatever. You'll see live transcript, and you can click on it. And you have a choice of having a person type in those which will be always more accurate or almost always more accurate, or sending it out for this kind of machine live transcript, which if you read is sometimes comical, about what it actually says. But it gives you a gist. And what's kind of cool about it, what I really like in Zoom that you don't see anywhere else, is the ability to move it. So you can actually move it around and put it wherever it makes the most sense for you. Go ahead, John.
Does it save the transcript file too, Alex?
I think it does, actually. I believe that it saves it out as a separate file. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, you can save the transcript file right from your desktop if you wanted to. Another thing is, I don't know if you noticed this, but YouTube is burning those transcripts right into the. Yep.
Wow, that's cool. It's burning them in, or it's putting them in as a
burning.
Oh, interesting. That may not be the best thing. All right. Are you sure it's burning them in, or the CC just on?
Yeah, I turned the CC off. I'm turning it back on and off, and I'm not getting any other types of transcript.
Oh yeah, it is burning them in. Huh. All right. Well, that's a unfortunate way to do that. So that's probably a bug report that we can send to them, and I may turn it off so that it doesn't burn all this stuff in. That's yeah. All right, next question.
Next question comes to us from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says, ZDNet reports that Microsoft will next week debut its cloud PC subscription-based desktop as a service platform. Could this be a better choice for remote computing for production? It seems it will offer workstation OSs rather than servers.
We're all trying to think through the. So I guess they're basically giving us something other than Amazon. Instead of installing something on AWS, that you can just they're letting you just subscribe and just turn on a PC. Is that right, Rupert?
It looks like they're going after the workstation market. So for organizations who are already using some kind of VDI infrastructure on-premise hardware, it looks like they're going after that market. So virtualized desktops for users.
I have to admit that it has, with the setup in AWS of the way you provision it, I've often thought, someone should just turn a service on where I can just go to a web page and say, I want this PC, and I don't have to think about any of the back end of it. And it looks like that's what this is kind of going down the path of, is just, I don't have to, I have a nice GUI to allow me to kind of just make that happen. Interesting. Yeah, I think it'll. Yeah, go ahead, Beiju.
Yeah, it looks interesting. I'm just curious about whether or not they're going to offer proper graphical workstations with heavy GPUs. Because if they're aiming mainly at the office for the VDIs, then it just might be simple PCs with lower specs. So whether or not it might be useful for production is a question. So once we know a bit more, it might get a bit answer.
Next question.
Comes from somebody named Alex L. in Novato, California. We don't see that often. I have a high 8 tape that has not been in a deck for 30 years. Where's the best place to carefully recover the content?
I found the tape that I'd been looking for, and I stored it, of course, because I thought it was important. But I realized it hadn't been opened and put in. And I was like, oh, I can put it in a high 8. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to touch that tape. I want to send it to somebody to have them recover it. Go ahead, Carl.
So if you want the recovery and you're okay paying a little bit more money, so about $30 an hour, Spires, so Spires is the one. So they're in the US, they're pretty good. If you have a large volume, for people out there who may be looking for a similar, but have large volume, there is another one. So, and this one I would generally say scan corner, but this is for large volume stuff where it's maybe not so delicate.
And what's the URL for Spires?
I'll put them in Makana right now underneath this question.
Yeah. All right, next question.
I was just going to add in on that. I've had tapes that were unreadable, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you, Alex. And if it works, please let me know, because I've got.
Well, the main thing is that the tricky part is that the one thing that I know, because I've done archiving in the past, is not to put it in anything.
Right.
If I put it in and go, oh, it didn't work, it's done. So the key is that you don't touch it, because they have to bake it. Like this is like they have to rebake the whole. They have to reheat it, and it's a process. But I realized I just didn't know who does that now. I haven't had to do this for maybe 15 years. So anyway, next question.
Okay, Rupert McCrae's up next, and Rupert says, have all Windows users in the group ensured that they are patched against PrintNightmare CVE 2021 34527? Microsoft released an out-of-band security update for this earlier this week.
And I assume this must be a pretty big bug, or a pretty big issue if they're asking us to do it in the middle. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, they basically put out the patch, and then like 2 days later said, hey, do the update right away, so they could get them updated before anybody realized that there was a problem. But yeah, it's definitely a big nightmare, and I do have like 4 or 5 machines I still haven't updated, because I don't turn them on that much. So
what is the vulnerability? Do we know? Go ahead, Rupert.
It's something to do with the print spooler can be exploited to gain access to the file system, something along those lines. And some group found the vulnerability and published it, thinking it had already been documented, and it hadn't. So it was and then they removed that post, but it was too late because it was out there. So it's all to do with the print spooler.
Oops. Next question.
It comes from Tlaloc, and he's here in the panel with, I'm very excited to learn more about and be involved with the Office Hours 2.0 revision. When will we re-enter that process?
August. So Andy's coming out, Andy Carluccio's coming out on the 21st we're going to be working on the hardware. So I've been ordering a bunch of hardware for it so that we can be ready to tie that together. So I'm working on it next week as far as doing the build so that it's ready for Andy. And then we're going to start building it out, and we'll start testing it on probably on the 21st. and then it starts to pick up speed first week of August. And so, what we're doing is for those of you who are watching, we're going to we experimented with it around WWDC, around just like what could we do. We got some good ideas about what that looks like. August will be very testy, like it'll be a test environment. Most likely, we will continue to do it this way for the mainstream, but there'll be another path that you'll get to see that we'll start building people up to, we'll have a team that's kind of building, which can include all of you, that will be building the show. So what it does is we're basically using ZoomIso to take up to 20 feeds out of Zoom. Then those will go into the atem. Those, then we're using ZoomOSC to control basically what's going out to the multi-view, as well as what's going into the super sources. And so basically what we're trying to get done right now is the panelist view that we'll let all of you raise your hand in the back end. That's going to feed back into ZoomOSC, which will then control what goes into the super sources. And so we won't have to, we'll be able to create super sources dynamically inside of the atem, which we don't know of anybody who's done that before. So it's a little bit of a like, it might take us a little minute to figure it out. And so, anyway, so that's going to be as we start to really experiment with this. So we'll have graphics. We're also going to probably we're going to try bumping the resolution to 4K. So 4K HDR. So we'll do HDR10 and eventually binaural to YouTube, and then we'll probably have a test stream that a handful of you will have access to, just because I can't afford to pay for a lot of people to watch it, but a test stream that is going to either Akamai or AWS. That is Vision and Atmos, just so we can kind of play with it. And so anyway, so we're gonna, the goal though is that in September we kind of go live with that, and it'll be Vision and Atmos or HDR10 and binaural 4K, and again, our signals will still be 1080, so it'll be scaled up when we're full screen. But when you see the super sources or you see the grid, it's going to look really good because it's going to be very high resolution. So anyway, there's going to be, part of the experiment is getting to something we're doing every day at a really high resolution and really high quality. Part of the thing is refining our conversation, and part of it's figuring out how we do this globally. So this is going to be something that we're going to be looking for people who want to volunteer to be part of that production pipeline. The goal is to have very few people in the office running it, and have people, running the switch and doing the audio and doing the video and doing, prepping graphics and taking what Carl does and supersizing it and figuring all these bits and pieces out. Can we get, kind of the question is can we get 20 or 30 people working in unison on a show, at the same time from all over the world? And can we do that every day? And so that's going to be kind of the thing that we're playing with. I think it's going to be an incredible sandbox for us to learn virtual production together, and for people to have an opportunity to kind of figure out how to be part of that, and how to look at it, for us to find, for all of us to find other people that we can work with. So anyway, so that's going to be the experiment. The goal is to have it pretty well refined by the time we get to NAB, which is where we really want to start. We want to cover NAB in a way that no one else has. And so we're working on that, and then we'll continue to scale it up. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting experiment. We can always back up to where we're at right here if it doesn't work. But I think that it's going to be kind of a different kind of show than anyone's seen before. And we'll look for opportunities to stretch stuff because of the kind of quality that we have. And we'll see where we go with that. Anyway, that's what's coming up, and we'll have more postings as this month goes through to find people that want to experiment with it in August. Next question
comes to us from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, and he says AWS has extended its local zones footprint with data centers in metro areas like Dallas and LA, again bringing resources closer to users for latency-sensitive applications, including VPC and EC2. Is this another potential game changer?
It definitely makes a difference in some low latency latency like if you look at something like, I don't know for sure, but what I believe is happening, I'm spending a lot of time in MetaHuman right now. and in MetaHuman, you're basically running an instance. That's why it takes so long to start up. So you're spinning up, like literally what Epic is doing when you open MetaHuman is it's spinning up an instance for you to use, and then you're interacting with a cloud computing device to do what you're doing. And so that what's interesting about that is I have pretty low latency, with it. It seems totally responsive, but as you get into games and you get into those types of things, it has to be nearly zero latency. And so now every mile starts to matter. And especially with some of the activations people want to do with 5G, they're really trying to figure out ways to move it. They're talking about putting servers into arenas and or they were before COVID. But those extra miles are tens of milliseconds, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the user feel of like when you're pushing something around, 30 milliseconds is noticeable, and so that's so you're trying to get down to that 10, 15, milliseconds. It also has to do with high frequency trading. is useful. So that's why almost all the high frequency are right around where they literally find new routes. They try to find new routes that are shaving off 1 or 2 milliseconds, and they make millions on just leeching off of the. I view high frequency trading as leeching, like little leeches. They're just pulling blood out for no reason. but it's good business for them. Next question.
Rupert McRae here in the panel is back again. This time he asks or notes that Elgato has said save the date for the Elgato event on July 15th, but seemingly with no published agenda. Is this normal, or what can we expect? Maybe I'm missing something, he says.
Sounds like they want you to come. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, they're playing a game on Twitter. For every certain number of likes, they're dropping a clue on Twitter. So I put the link in there. It's something video. It says games. So the first clue is, are you ready for a game? So, but maybe that game was this Twitter thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, Elgato has been doing. They've gone through many lives. I don't know if people know that Elgato's been around for a long time, and they made receivers for TV that you could put into your Mac, and that was like their first thing. And then they made some automation tools and some digital. Like they've kind of moved around the industry. So they've been good survivors, but they've really latched on to some really useful tools. So it'll be interesting to see what they show. Next question.
Moving on to another Rupert McRae question out of Dallas. TikTok is running a pilot program, TikTok Resumes, a job application platform where applications are made in video and where candidates can showcase their creativity and skill sets. What other platforms might follow TikTok's lead?
I don't know. It's an interesting idea. Potentially exclusionary. Like it's like I was like, really? Like does that? I was kind of surprised that people didn't get that. I think people just don't understand it. Like that the video has its it allows people to sort visually. So and for people's the advantage of it is that you do get to see what people can do. And if you're looking for a creator, or if you're looking for someone who's needs to do that kind of thing, it could be useful. But that was the only thing that came up for me when I saw it. I was like, that's an easy way to sort, in a way that is usually not legal in the United States. Go ahead, Rupert.
I guess it's also interesting because, I mean, no matter how people apply for jobs, a lot of the interviewing process is going to be over video or Zoom or whatever now anyway. So, I mean, maybe it's just a stepping stone to get to that step in the process.
It saves you a lot of time. I mean, you could, like it just, from an employer being able to have lots and lots of resumes that you can just sort through rather than having to actually set up a meeting is a real, we'll let them burn through things fairly quickly. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I tried doing video interviews to screen rental applicants, and about 1 in 100 people, about 1 in 100 will do it. It's just very exclusionary. I agree with you, Alex.
Yeah, but it gives it obviously plays to the advantage of people who do. Like that's the thing that if you have a good camera and you have a good mic and you're good at doing this, it gives you an advantage if you have a company that's actually using that. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, it's easy to fix. Just make the applicant required to become a Wookiee in your video so that it cuts across all gender and other stereotypes.
Again, it works. It works for the people who have participated in it, and it works for the people who are looking for people. It may not, Again, there's some pretty large questions that'll come up as it moves forward, I think. Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, I'm looking at options to integrate MADI, M-A-D-I devices into my SoundGrid network. Would you feel safe betting on the long-term future of SoundGrid as a standard, even though SG is a proprietary platform, or would you go for a modular conversion chassis?
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I don't think Wave SoundGrid is going away, but you might consider using the Wave SoundGrid to Dante bridge so that your whole network is pushed over into Dante rather than MADI. That might give you more flexibility with all the hardware that's out there. Basically, there's more Dante hardware than MADI hardware.
I mean, at this point, I know that Blackmagic just added it to their stuff, but I kind of consider MADI as a legacy format. Like it's something that it's easy for broadcasters to use, and they've used for many years, and it doesn't require any technical skill and everything else. But I I barely ever see it. Like it's when if you're a broadcaster, you're working in a broadcast truck and so on and so forth, you see it all the time. But even in broadcast, I see these huge collisions of the old broadcasters are bringing Maddie in, and the new broadcasters all have Dante. And then they have to do this huge mesh between, route between them because no one that I know that's building anything current is using Maddie. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, you're right. So Maddie's actually not a network protocol like Dante. Maddie is just a device-to-device in a studio. You normally see it in a studio, maybe a broadcast truck, but that's because they're doing device-to-device, not on a network.
Yeah, I mean, broadcasters like it because it's easy. You send a BNC out, and it just it just works, right? It just sends those channels. So I get that it's kind of a low grade one, but I wouldn't build anything around it. Like I would have interfaces to it, but I don't know if I would consider Maddie as a core structure. And I think it's unfortunate. It's one of the reasons that I kind of felt like Blackmagic didn't completely understand audio was when they put it into the constellation, because you're just kind of like, huh? Next question.
It has to do with the program Wiral Lite. It says, has somebody used this for live production? Comes from Jonas Dattel out of Reutlingen, Germany.
Has anyone seen it? I have not seen that thing, so I don't know what it is.
It comes. I have an app comes up when I did the research here just a second ago.
Oh, it looks like a cable cam.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cable cams are cool. I mean, the big thing with cable cams is just the precision of control and stability. And so it's just as the price goes down, you oftentimes have less precision of control, and you also have stability starts to drop down as the cable gets thinner, as the machinery gets lighter. But at $400, I could. It's worth it. Might be worth a test. But it looks cool at that price. My guess is that you'd see the movement at that, because again, what makes those work is weight, weight and stability. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, yeah, it's an iPhone camera, so I mean you have a pretty wide angle shot, so I don't think the stability should be pretty good. It's hanging off the bottom, but yeah, it's a single cable. So that's kind of the idea. There's nothing other than one cable or one rope.
Well, and there's a lot of folks that make versions of that. There's that, those cable cams that are single cables that go through it. They tend to be heavier and larger and more expensive. And so and those can work very, very well for some incredibly cool and long shots.
A windy day is going to be trouble for this one.
Windy days are trouble for all cable cams. It's it's a thing. Go ahead, Carl.
So if money's not an option, then the syrup. So yeah, so this runs on 2 wires. It can handle DSLR, can handle Blackmagic Pocket, all those kind of things.
Yep. Yeah, and as a note for our producers, we've got a lot of Monogram questions coming in, but we're running low on questions for the first hour. So if you've got more questions, this is a good time to put them in. Go ahead, Beiju.
Yeah, ProAim also makes a cable cam, which you can basically mount a Ronin gimbal onto it. So you can get the cable cam with a safety wire as well. It's about $2,000 as well, I think. To $2,500. ProAim.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on, Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana is next up, and he says the new ZoomISO works great with an eGPU into an atem Extreme. 4 outputs work great, but I've not worked with Syphon before for use with a DeckLink. Any resource suggestions?
It works great with an eGPU into, I guess I must be using Intel Mac, but yeah, I have, or an external enclosure. What we got is Sonnet external enclosures for Blackmagic cards. Go ahead, Tlaloc.
So I'm not sure if what you're asking for is resources on using Syphon or resources on using the DeckLink, but I say probably the absolute best resource is the ZoomISO channel on Discord, because Andy will just answer all of your questions really quickly. Yeah. But Syphon is a protocol that essentially moves the video and the audio across that local machine, and so you're going out of ZoomISO into the DeckLink with Black Syphon, and then out of the DeckLink onto SDI.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So this was actually discussed yesterday in the Zoom OSC test kitchen. So if you can find a recording of that, I think they posted on Facebook maybe, but if you can get a recording of that, it's some information in there for that.
Next question.
Moving on to Rupert McRae, who's back with another one. And this next one is the latest NAB Amplify newsletter talks extensively about the future of immersive and experiential entertainment. It says there will be, quote, tremendous hunger for this in the coming months. When will we see supply, and will the NAB show focus on this?
How are they defining immersive? And, you know, that's always the how NAB is defining it. Did you read much into the article as far as what they said, Rupert?
I mean, it's like typically along the lines of we talked about here, you know, immersive theaters and walk around experiences and audio placement and all that kind of stuff. And but they're really focusing on it, and you know, they're talking about they're suggesting months rather than years.
I mean, what I can say is there's this huge rush right now. I mean, Apple basically unleashed 200 million users for immersive audio, you know, and they've, you know, a lot of the phones now can all do, you know, a lot of interactive tools. And so that is every record company right now is going through their entire back catalog and remixing everything for Atmos, you know, and trying to get part of it. So we're going to see, I think, a huge explosion of what they're doing. But then that kind of opens up, that kind of creates a rush that can be an opportunity for a lot of other things. Go ahead, Bill.
Across the longer view of time, as somebody who's been going to NAB for more than 20 years, some years their themes hit and some years their themes miss dramatically. So you can never really ping. If NAB says it's going to happen. I remember 3D video was a theme one year, and
I made a lot of money on 3D video.
Yeah,
I was a big fan. You don't have, it didn't have to last. You just have to just not get your capex over top of your skis. You know, like that's all you have to do. And so it was a good. That was a good ride. It was a lot of fun. And the funny thing is that a lot of what we learned with 3D video has affected what we do for VR. You know, my understanding of, you know, convergence and process and how to do all those things. You know, a lot of these technologies keep coming around, and so you know, it was definitely an eye opener for me. I just got a Quest 2 before I went on vacation, and took it down. I have all these cousins or nieces and nephews that were in the house, and probably 20 of them. And basically, the only time it wasn't one person, but the only time someone didn't have the Quest on was when it was charging. that was the biggest problem, is it doesn't have removable batteries. And so, you know, they just played it constantly, and it was just they really, really enjoyed it. And so I think that there is something there. And I think that, you know, some of the tests that we've done over the last 10 years around immersive are pretty exciting. Of changing the way a venue works. So you can literally have a venue be something else inside of your camera, but also allowing you to go anywhere and be anywhere and learn things. But you can, you know, or augment the things that you're at. Imagine going to a historical site where there's a heads-up display. You know, like you pick up your phone and you can see, like, if I always use, I grew up going to battle, you know, Civil War battlefields in the United States, and because we lived near them. And if you imagine like being able to walk up to the field where Pickett's charge was and pick up your phone and see what it looked like through the phone, you know, like, you know, and this is what that looked like, and this is what it sounded like, you know, and that those kinds of things are coming, you know, being able to have these immersive experiences that you can throw on just even for a second. People keep on thinking about, how do we make a movie that's that way? You don't need to make a movie. What if you made 1 minute that just informed you about what you were looking at? Go ahead, Bill.
I agree with Alex 100%. I will say, though, that the NAB is the National Association of Broadcasters. And back then they were talking about 3D becoming a part of broadcast. And as we know, broadcast never went into 3D. So to pick the nuggets of technology and extrapolate it into other industries, I think is the biggest value you can get out of these things. That doesn't mean it's going to change your business or their business or a business the way they kind of promote that it might.
Next question.
Moving on to Jesse Mills. And Jesse Mills says, has anyone experimented with running switching software that's streaming or recording and 2 instances of Zoom via a Zoom client and ZoomOSC on a single machine with 3 displays? Displays 2 and 3 would be pinned Zoom people.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
I would say to divide it up. I wouldn't want to throw everything all on one machine. I would split it up and then send it over NDI. That's the slickest way to do it, because then you're not overloading that machine. You might notice all your resources go topping out, and that's just asking for a crash. So that'd be my recommendation. That's why I always run it anyway.
Next question. Oh, go ahead, Beju. Sorry, I missed you there.
Yeah, not completely like that, but I do have a Zoom Room and vMix running on one machine. So I'm often a vMix running in the background, controlling it remotely, scraping the Zoom Room as well as streaming out. And it does use up resources quite a bit. So you need a hefty machine, and then there's a little bit of risk. So I would definitely say split up as much as you can, echoing what Guy said. It's possible, but it might not what we want to use for production, basically.
Go ahead, Talak.
So we push the envelope and the limits a lot in theater because of budgetary reasons, and so we've done some things with multiple ZoomOSC clients, and we've done stuff with ZoomOSC and a vanilla client together. The thing is that you're immediately going to tax your system a lot more, and so there's just a higher potential. So what we do is we weigh the budget versus the risk, and then that is what we, if we can't go buy 6 other computers, then we have to think about it that way.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, for Office Hours 2.0, have you thought about using audio transport technology, specifically SRT and Ravenna, to enable the audio mixer to mix the show in a conventional way? DirectOut GmbH and the Italian company Viva Valdi have worked on that using their low latency VPN techs.
Yeah, so what we're working on right now is figuring out a way to control the mixer, probably over Streamweaver. And with building kind of, we want to kind of diversify the interface, or just pull it away so that you just have control over what you need. So it may be using Isadora, using those types of things to just control what is necessary for that piece. The goal is to kind of not try to deal with it directly. So for instance, we may start with people using the atem software, but our goal will be to build some kind of, most likely, an Isadora interface that you're able to just tap on what you need, as opposed, looking at what Victor's been experimenting with TJ and with other folks, is really building this out so that anybody can log in, be given access, and then can actually run the show. But they don't need to necessarily have a VPN. They don't need to have those other bits and pieces. Now, that's for what's running in our system. What we are looking at for remote guests specifically, and this really deals with artists, is looking at ways to bring stems back to us in 3210. So we're looking at Unity Connect for that, to connect that out right now. And so the idea would be to be able to take, we can take 3 or 4 stems or 10 stems or whatever, bring it back to us, especially because we're looking at mixing it in Atmos and in immersive. We need the stems, so we need to send them to send all those, and then we'll put those into a most likely a 5.1 bed on a day-to-day basis, to basically spread out that audio. And a lot of times, if you have like an artist, you say, why would you do it if you have an artist with a guitar? Well, if you give them reverb that floats into that space, it feels much bigger than what it did before for those who are watching and listening. So we're working on that process there. But those are the technologies currently that we're looking. This is going to be a big lab, and we're going to experiment a lot. We'll probably hit most of these technologies over time. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania says, I use the Shure SE215 in-ear monitors, but even with the smallest buds, the plastic housing is just too big. It's not comfortable for me. Any suggestions for a similar quality but physically smaller kit?
Go ahead, Carl.
For identical quality, but it comes with 6 different buds and a smaller housing, the Behringer version. So this is very high quality. There is even higher quality, the 240, which is a dual drive. This is a single drive system, which is the same as a 15. The dual drive system, which is a 240, which is more for monitoring, I guess.
It's an amazing price. Next question.
JB in Wisconsin is up next, and he says, I'm new to all of this, and I'm trying to understand mix minus. What's the simplest, most cost-effective way to bring multiple Zoom participants into a super source for a stream?
Okay, go ahead, Carl.
Well, the way we were doing it for, I think, the second version of WWDC, so the Thursday version, where we had just pinned participants. I know there's NDI now in Zoom rooms, but if we're talking cost-effective, because you have a mix minus already. That's already built into Zoom for your participants. And then simply, as long as you have the people who are on, panelists essentially have good muting principles and they understand how to mute and unmute, then the way we were doing it by pinning multiple people from different computers or different instances of Zoom, and then bringing those in to your, I guess, Extreme, if you're going to use an Extreme. That was, I think, the most cost-effective way if you already have an Extreme, or vMix would also have that ability as well, I believe.
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by super source. If you just mean 2 or 3 or 4 people on the screen without any graphics or overlays and all that stuff, I mean, you can do that just with Zoom by pinning people and then streaming that out to YouTube or wherever, much like we do here.
Sure. Do the multi-pins go out to YouTube? For a long time they didn't, and I haven't had to do it. I don't think that if you multi-pin, they don't actually go to YouTube. It's just something in Zoom. So it's kind of the same as if someone's watching on the web. They have the same problem. So if your entire audience is in Zoom, it works great. If it's not, it doesn't work as well. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So trying to tackle that mix minus part of things, Zoom handles the mix minus unless you're going from different Zooms. So if you keep it in the same Zoom, then that's fine. If you mean that you're trying to get individual audio stems from that for any type of mixing, that can't be done just yet. So those are the two.
It can be. We do it where we pull each person out one at a time, and then we build that mix. So we switch them. I think this might be what is being spoken to here, and then we mix it in the switcher. And the main thing is that what you're doing is you have to build an entire bus that is dedicated to each person, and that bus has all the volumes at Unity across it, inside the bus, except for the one that was if that bus is going to Carl's, the return to Carl is that bus minus Carl. so and then the return to Rupert is that bus minus Rupert. But you have to have a whole bus of, these are all the inputs for, these are all the stuff that's coming in, it's being used for the show. We're going to send it back out, but we're going to remove the person who we're sending it to. So it's the mix minus them.
And you're saying different rooms, they're in different rooms, right? For that?
When we do it, yeah, we put them
webinar.
We put them all into individual rooms, one at a time. And so if you look at WWDC 1, that was each person in their own room. WWDC 2 was pinned. So just 2 different ways of doing it. Go ahead, Salak.
So I would say one very, very inexpensive way to do super source is to indeed do multi-spotlighting, and then take and scrape a participant view, an attendee view, and send that to YouTube. If that's what you're trying, if that's the workflow you're working with, where you're doing a webinar and YouTube, you can do a very simple. You're not going to get lower thirds and things like that, but at least you can scrape that out, and then not using Zoom to send out to YouTube. That will work with multi-pin or multi-spotlight.
Next question
comes from Douglas Carmichael again, and Douglas says, when setting up large-scale lighting systems, how do you ensure that fixtures are set up properly? And he's thinking about the address and mode and all the other settings in it prior to them being flown or mounted.
Go ahead, Carl.
I would hire Talak.
There you go. That's how you fix that. Go ahead, Rupert.
I mean, if you're assembling an entire rig, which you're going to suspend, then you'd assemble it, test it on the ground before you winch it up. If you're doing individual fixtures, I'd have a leg of my DMX or whatever network I'm using in my hand on the ground and make sure the light's programming, knowing that's the same network I've got up on the ceiling before I send a guy up there to fit it.
Talak, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about planning. So do your paperwork, get everything addressed, put everything together, then send it into the air, and then have the network all talking to each other. So, lighting designers, there's one thing that all of us have in common, and that is we're control freaks. So we want to have control of everything. Right. And and if there's anything that doesn't have DMX or anything that is just kind of dumb in that way, we don't like it.
I think that people, when they start doing productions, they think that people get to these venue and they put it all together, and then they figure it all out. And even on a tour, for instance, there's a big warehouse facility outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that is where pretty much everyone builds their tour, because there's these huge stage areas, and they put out they build the stages, they figure out what it's going to look like. They have all the lighting, all the audio, everything all figured out. They figure out how they're going to tour with it. They spend, sometimes months, in that facility. And it's the only one I know of. I mean, I'm sure there's probably other ones. People have their own warehouses, like, Metallica has its own like warehouse in San Rafael here, and so they can build some of the stuff out. But for a lot of touring bands, they will go to this one location. They'll figure it all out. They'll figure out how to tie it all together. They'll figure out how to build all the cases. Everything's numbered. Everything's figured out. Everything's sorted out so that when they go on tour, they're not figuring that part out. They're figuring other things out, but they're not figuring out how all the stuff ties together. Go ahead, Roscoe, and then Talal.
Search the office hours archives for a second hour on DMX. You will find so many tips in there that'll just save you hours of time if you're new to this.
Absolutely. Talal?
To speak a little bit more to what Alex was just talking about, there is LiteWrite is a program that we use to sort of track all of this information, these addresses, all these different kinds of information about what each light does. And LiteWrite will actually export stickers. And so you print out all this information, and stickers or little note cards that slide into plastic sleeves go on every light. And so the information needs to track. And when I'm an ALD, for example, at Seattle Opera, I'm literally printing out reams and reams of paper, and each electrician gets a booklet that is bound for them that they can put in their back pocket. So at any given point, they can pull out and get information, because you're talking about 500, 600, 700 lights.
Next question.
Moving on to the next one from Jim Hankins, Chesterfield, Michigan. With Blackmagic SDI to HDMI micro converters, I'm finding a regular need to power cycle them to force sync. Any suggestions for remotely doing this across a facility?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So one of my 9-to-5 jobs was working in an authorized repair center for TVs and cameras. So a little myth about HDMI is it's not hot swappable. It's not hot pluggable. You need to power off the device, plug in HDMI and turn it back on. It says it in all the manuals. None of us do it. But Blackmagic's going to like a gray screen when HDMI goes in. Instead of it frying the circuitry, which is what I used to repair, it simply just goes to it goes to a safe mode, and you have to power cycle. So technically you have to power cycle every time you hot plug or plug in a HDMI cable, not SDI. SDI is hot pluggable, but HDMI is not hot pluggable. The only other thing I can suggest is put the power, so the USB-C power bricks, on a controller that you can just switch on and off, like with Alexa or something. And that's another way of doing it, having the actual power point, because it's just USB-C, you just need to power cycle it.
And if you have a network UPS or a network PDU, you can literally just log into it and turn it off, and turn it back on. there's some dangers to that, of putting the ability to do that on a network, but that's one way to do it, and you can then give it a cycle. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so I have the PDUs in the rack, but these are throughout the facility at televisions that are hanging on the wall, and not
you would have to dedicate the a set of PDUs that are just for these things, right. or an outlet. They're so low draw, it could be, if they're all in one place, it could be an outlet that they're all tied to, that you just flip. Now, what are they in a facility? I guess I probably might try to find other ways to do it. What are they connecting to?
Televisions, for the most part. In some cases, computer monitors. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I would try to find some kind of EDI, lock it, HDMI that takes the signal into that resolution that you want, locks it, and then it stores it. And that way there's no handshake going on any longer. And that way you shouldn't have to mess around with this force syncing. It's just locked synced.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something. I mean, I think that Blackmagic's doing that. I haven't had that problem. I definitely have, especially TVs that will hook very cheap SDI to HDMI converters to, and they just stay in the background all the time, and they just work. Like you just plug them in like it's an SDI input. So it's interesting problem. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, would there be a sonic benefit to using a high-end direct box like the Phoenix Audio N8 for synthesizers before his audio interface, which is a DigiGrid IOX? And he has a couple of links there for more detail.
Go ahead, Carl.
No, generally not. So synthesizers, unless you're talking like synthesizers from 1970s, where you do want to control that gain a little bit, because they may be running a bit hot, or modular synths come out very hot, unless they have a low line level coming out, then most synths, no. So they can go directly into a line input on most audio interfaces, not a problem. I've got DIs, but I never use them on any of my synths, essentially. They're only used on guitar and my bass.
Next question.
Moving on, this one comes to us again from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, Alex, when you mentioned remote mixing, that's exactly what the DirectOut PRODIGY.MP does. What would you think of bringing them and/or ProtoStream, a US boutique, using their tech on as a second hour topic? And there's a link there.
Definitely put it as a suggestion into Discord, and we'll see if people vote it up. And if there's enough people interested, that would we definitely take a look at it. I think that it would depend on cost for us. Like we're looking at something that's probably closer to an X32, to kind of manage the stems that on the far end. So we would have to know what that how much that system costs. So from what we're doing. But I think having them on would make a lot of sense. So, but just put it in the second hour and we'll see if people vote it up. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles says, what's your preferred method to extend an HDMI cable run and why? And he wants to know SDI or Ethernet or optical or something else.
Go ahead, Carl.
So optical is excellent if you only want one way. So if you need to do like EARC, then that won't work. SDI, but again, SDI, unless you're using the bidirectional converter. I haven't tried bidirectional converter yet with the EARC because it may work. It's just sending information. But generally, the optical HDMI cable is a bit more expensive. It can be a little bit fragile, but they're the best for one-way direction.
Go ahead, Talon.
We often use HD base 10, I hope I have that right, where we going across an Ethernet cable. It's not actually a network protocol. But a lot of times that helps a lot because some projectors and other high-end equipment can just take that right in. So you don't have to have a box on both ends, just a box on the one end. Or you have a box on both ends and then you connect it with an Ethernet cable and off you
go. Roscoe.
The only thing I've tested to do Blackmagic design HDMI control from an atem mini to a pocket is the opticals. And so I'm sure I've heard that the bidirectionals work over SDI. I have not tested it. So that's the only reason I'm sticking with HDMI for now, but they are a little bit fragile, like you say.
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
The question did include why would you extend it? So, I mean, that, HDMI has its limits. So after what length would we go to one of these extensions?
At 4K or above, for me, it's about 12 feet. Like I got to figure out what we're going to do. It's not that because the problem is I find that the cables after that either need optical HDMI or to be converted to something else. We just find that they don't work all the time. So different devices have a different amount of power they're pushing through that HDMI. And so we end up with things that just can't, it just doesn't go through. And it worked one day and doesn't work the next. Go ahead, Carl.
Again, working in an electronic repair center, we found that HDMI 1.4 was 5 meters, HDMI 2.0, 3 meters.
Yeah, so about the same. Yeah, so I think that we'll do copper. I mean, we'll do SDI up to about 150 feet. That's the outer edge of what we consider okay. Now we know that SDI can run up to 900 feet. I mean, we've run it that far successfully, but we don't do it. We'll switch to glass pretty quickly. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd say it depends on the infrastructure too. If there's existing Ethernet ports, then going to NDI is a very good option with like the bird dog converters. There's other brands as well. Magewell is what we're using. We run our security system. It's a multi-viewer through our entire building, and you can just open up NDI Studio Monitor and see everywhere in the entire building. There's like 9 cameras that you can see over one, but it's all just Ethernet because the infrastructure is there.
Yeah. Now we're going to speed up. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik out of Norway says, what happened to the audio-only stream in Mukana? It has not worked for me for a while. Today it was playing music.
We started experimenting with it, and I don't know where those experiments went. So I know that part of it has been that, we have to figure out. I believe Taylor was playing with it, and maybe it's been playing with, and he set it down. So we'll take a look at it. I have to admit that I haven't been paying attention to it for the last couple of weeks. It's been busy. We'll get it back online. Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles says, for the panelists, are you hearing your own voice in your in-ear monitors? Does the Zoom platform allow you to add your voice to your in-ear mix?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Excuse me. So Zoom doesn't allow you to do that. You could do it in the OS level and monitor your microphone, but you're going to hear some latency. You're going to hear a slight echo because it's got to go into software and back out. If you really want to monitor your microphone in true real time, your microphone needs to go through like something like a mixer first, and then give yourself a mix minus or monitoring or whatever. But if you go through software or Zoom or whatever, you're going to get that latency in your ear.
Roscoe, real quick, and then we'll move on because I got
audio hijack and loop back in a Mac allow you to side tone back to your ear.
Yep. Next question.
Gordon Lake is up next from Los Angeles. What would be a good travel jib that could handle the weight of a Blackmagic Pocket 4K, just using in place of a slider for interview 2 shots?
Slider and jib. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Kessler crane. So look up at Kessler crane. They will have something in your range. They attach their base to a slider, so you can do it on, or you can just put it on top of a tripod, or you can buy the whole system from them. But Kessler crane should have something in a good price range that'll meet your travel needs, because they'll be packed down into little bags as well.
Go ahead, Bill. I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to double up on Kessler. They have a nice little travel jib. They call the porta jib. I think Kessler porta jib, real small.
Kessler doesn't make the porta jib, do they?
It's not
they've
the
got a
porta
slider
jib.
and they've got a slider and a crane that goes on top of the slider. It's pretty cool.
Kessler has a jib, but I think the porta jib is a different.
I think you're right. I misused the term. Porta jib is a brand, and it's not that.
Yeah, porta jib is something we've actually. The only reason I know is that I've used it a lot all over the world. It does pack up. The porta jib packs up really nicely. Edelchrome Jib 1 also is kind of has a controller to it, so you can kind of move the jib around, which is
Kessler's
cool
is called Pocket Jib.
Pocket jib. That's what I was thinking of. And yes, Edelchrome is great. They're pricey, but they're really good. Next
question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, would using a data-centered PDU like the AP7900B create excessive noise for audio versus an audio-grade PDU like the Black Lion Audio PG2?
I don't know. We haven't had a lot of noise issues at that level, so I don't know if I have the answer for that. Anyone else have any theories about? Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So it might handle some noise, but it's meant to travel power. It's not meant to deal with stuff for audio. So I would say this probably wouldn't work best.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I've had a couple of circumstances where power supply has been the source of noise in audio lines, and you just have to either use a lifter or something to get it out of there.
Next question.
Ground lifter was what I meant. JJ McKenna is in San Rafael and says, which audio file format supports 16 channels and specifically 15.1? So
audio file format. Well, waves, AIF, go ahead, Carl. A lot of them do.
Yeah, so there's a bundled waves file. So instead of doing 16 wave files in one, it's actually it's a B file, so B waves file, which is what most of my recorders will do. That's probably the most common way because it doesn't compress. And it's also used, I believe, in theater to do multi-tracks out. So discrete multi-tracks out, they have B wave files that go out.
Next question.
The last one in the regular group from Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Herrenab, Germany. Audio mixer question. How far has the test been going for the Behringer wing that fits between the Behringer X32 and the Yamaha QL1?
Tests haven't gone anywhere yet. I don't have a wing. So I tested it in my head and it worked pretty well. Like I was, the way I wired it up, I felt like the communication was really good. And so in my head, it works amazingly well, but we haven't, we have some X32s in the office. We have some QL1s in the office. We don't have any wings in the office. And so maybe we can somehow persuade Behringer to send us one to test. But I am interested in it because I think that it's a really interesting platform. I think that they have put a lot of value into that platform. So I'm very interested to test it. There was something about it that I don't remember what it was that it's missing that the QL1 has, and I can't think of what it is, but it was like, oh, like it was like I was like, and I have to go back and look. I was going through their stats, and I was like, oh, this isn't going to work because of X, Y, and Z, and now I can't remember what it was. So we'll take a look at it. It might have been wrong. So we'll take a look. But yeah, we haven't done any testing on it yet. So now we're going to change gears. We just got through those questions, and now we have a lot of questions stacking up for Andy. So Andy Hayes is joining us from Kitchener, Canada, from Monogram. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for letting me join.
Absolutely, great to have you. And tell us a little bit about Monogram, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a hardware and software tech company out of Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. And what we do is we build Creative Console, which is this system of modular tactile hardware. So you can see I can pull this apart and put it back together. It's all connected magnetically. And what our modules do is that they give you hands-on control of certain key parameters in either post-processing or other creative software. So an example that I can show you guys today will be like Final Cut Pro, Adobe Lightroom Classic. Another one that we work with, and frankly, I don't have the horsepower to run on stream, is Unreal Engine. We do quite a bit on Unreal Engine specifically tailored to the virtual production space.
And I'm just going to ask you to pull your mic a little closer. You're a little soft on our end. So just
yeah, sorry.
Pull it up. No worries.
Should be a little better.
Yeah, much better. So what is the process like? How do you develop most of the interactions between the hardware and the software?
Yeah, so traditionally speaking, we have been the developers of the integration between the hardware, our software, which kind of sits in the middle, which is called Monogram Creator, and then the target application, so something like Unreal or Premiere or Final Cut Pro. Now, one of the things that we've released recently is a software developer kit, which makes it easier for developers or third parties, anyone that has access to APIs on the creative software end, to then integrate with us.
And I have to admit, one of the things that I was, when I saw what you did with this, for years, I was like, oh, you know what someone needs is to be able to have just sliders and buttons and things, and then they just snap together with magnets. Like that was my big idea. I was like, and then you put a couple feeds, so they have little feeds that connect, and then they'll just snap together. And when I saw Monogram come out, I was like, oh, they did it. You know, like, and I, you know, it was like, I knew I was never going to do it because, you know, building hardware is hard. so it's, you know, like, and one of the things that I really like about it is that it does. Now I will say that, you know, this isn't like a $10 item, but it doesn't feel like it when you use it either. You know, so when you have the scroll wheel, it feels the closest thing that I can think of the big scroll that I'm is I don't know what you guys call that specifically. I call it the big scroll. But yeah, that one there is the closest thing that it feels like to me. It's just a slightly stiffer than the old iPod. Like
right. Yeah, the click wheel.
You kind of, you know, for that, and so it's that's hard to do. Now, how long have you guys been putting these together?
Yeah, so we started with our branding as Palette Gear rather than Monogram. So we rebranded for our second generation. Palette Gear has been operational since approximately 2014 when it was launched on a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign. And then we've been shipping hardware in some various form since about 2015. Now, Monogram Creative Console was launched once again, crowdfunding campaign late 2019 and shipped late 2020. Yeah. So this current iteration is still pretty new. It's, between 8 and 9 months old.
Do you have anything you can show us?
Oh, I have tons of stuff to show you guys.
Show us. Okay.
All right. So first and foremost, let me show you guys here. This is, I'm just going to switch over to, this is our UI for our application called Monogram Creator. And what you're seeing in Monogram Creator is basically an on-screen representation of the hardware that's on my desk. So if I flip feeds over, you'll see the hardware that's on my desk right now. And it should match what's in Creator perfectly. And
what's interesting is you pull something off or put something on, it literally appears and disappears, you know, it's gone.
It is all hot swappable in real time. Right. And because we kind of code the modules with a hardware serial number or a firmware serial number, they remember their assignments when I move them around.
Now you do have to pay attention to your positive and negative leads, right? On what they have as far as how you connect them.
That's correct. So if I just come back to my webcam here, you'll see that we do have some pogo pins on one side of my orbiter module here, and these make positive contact, and then the rest of them have flat pad contacts. And our central module, our core module, which is the one with the screen on it here, that serves as basically the hub for the entire unit. So it connects everything over USB and powers the whole layout.
Yep. Go ahead and show us a little bit more about how it works.
Absolutely. So in Monogram Creator, the first thing that I do is I select the application that I want to work with. Now, it's going to show all the integrations that we build for it, all the integrations that third parties have built for it, like Final Cut Pro, as well as it's just going to read the apps that are running on my machine. So it's reading that I have OBS and Zoom open. And then once I select one of these apps, it takes me into what we call Profile View. So Profile View is what I was showing you before, where it has the layout of my connected hardware. And each one of these profiles is a specific set of mappings for a certain application. So for today, I have it set up for Lightroom Classic, as well as for Final Cut Pro.
Now, one question is I saw Zoom there. Does it control Zoom?
So that's actually a really good question. There are basically two layers of compatibility. One is via universal standards. We call it universal compatibility. So Zoom is covered via universal compatibility, meaning you can send hotkeys to Zoom. If there's any kind of gateway for sending, for example, joystick or MIDI messages to Zoom that someone else has put together, this would interface that way as well. But there's no direct integration using APIs as we've built with something like Lightroom Classic.
Right.
So the deeper level of integration, of course, is what you're going to get with the Adobe Suite, with Capture One, with Final Cut Pro, and we can't actually take credit for that one. That one was developed by Command Post on our SDK, or as well for Unreal Engine. And then the other apps you see here, they're more or less like a value add that's supported by these universal standards like MIDI, hotkeys, joystick, etc.
Cool. So how does it, so you have it set up right now for Final Cut?
Yes. So just to show you how I have it set up, I have 4 color grading profiles, and I'm actually switching between each of them with my core module. There are 2 keys on it, and I'm just pressing that to sequentially move backwards and forwards between these profiles.
So not only do you have each key do that, but the keys can actually, you can have that set up so that you can change a whole set of keys based on what mode you're in?
That's exactly correct. So we can have up to 15 profiles, whether they're for different apps or whether they're for the same app, all open at once. So how I'm using it with Final Cut Pro, for example, is I want to get the most out of my one orbiter because it's the one that controls color wheels most effectively in Final Cut. So even though I just have one orbiter, I'm extending it to cover all 4 color wheels with 4 corresponding profiles. And then if I jump into Final Cut, just to show you, for example, right now I'm controlling the shadows wheel. The inner part of the orbiter is a pressure sensitive disc. So if I apply pressure up and to the right, it's working similarly to a trackball, where it gives us this beautiful, precise 2-dimensional control over the shadows wheel. But now if I switch over to my next profile, I'm now controlling the midtones with the same module. Now my highlights, and now the master color wheel. And if I forget what my mappings are, all I need to do is press and hold this key, which is on the core module, and you'll see that it's popping up a contextual overlay showing me what all my assignments are. As soon as I let go of that key, that overlay is just going to disappear and allow me to go back to my work. So even though while I'm demoing, I'm jumping back to Monogram Creator, we don't really expect our customers to do that. We expect them to stay immersed in their work and just bring up this overlay as needed.
And that's built into that's always there? You push both of those down and the overlay always pops up?
Those are built into our pre-configured, we call them quick start profiles. You can override that if you want, but setting that up is as simple as one click. It's as simple as choosing, I want to use any of my pre-built profiles for Final Cut, and that just kind of comes as a package deal with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I noticed when I was playing with it with Final Cut, is that I tend to not want to customize my hardware. So I tend to be I'm very much like, I want to use my keyboard, or I want to just not, because I moved from computer to computer a lot. And so I have a tendency to like push away from that. And I noticed almost immediately when I connected, I was like, oh, this is a lot faster. It's just more organic. Like you're sitting there just kind of pulling things around, and it's just it is a faster experience when you have a piece of hardware that's controlling those things. And I always think that it's not going to be, and then every time I get into a piece of hardware, it just is a little bit more organic and faster to move through. Did you want to show us anything else before we jump to the questions? We've got a couple stacking up.
I guess
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to show you, just to your last point, actually, Alex. Let me jump into Lightroom Classic here. I come from a photography background. That's always, where I go back to. One of the things, if you're a Lightroom user, you'll know it's got this kind of panel-based UI where if you're working with the keyboard and the mouse, you really want things open like so, and which is cutting down the amount of focus that's on your image. And also when you're adjusting these sliders with your mouse, you're looking over here at the panel. You're not actually looking at what it's doing to the image. Or worse yet, you start editing based on your preconceptions of what you should do. So for example, if I go, you know what, this is a little light, I should put this to 0.5 stops. Pardon me. What I do is I miss out on the ability to creatively experiment with my editing. So one thing that I've found really effective with Monogram is just the ability to remove focus on all the UI elements that surround the work and just focus on the actual creative work at hand. And you'll see that as I'm using the orbiter here, we're changing by a 20th of a stop in time. And as I'm experimenting here, we'll see that 0.4 stops is exactly where I want it to be, both per the histogram, per my eyes. And I wouldn't necessarily choose that value arbitrarily if I was just typing things in here, or goodness knows that I can't hit that small of target if I'm using the mouse or my trackpad on the panel. So, you mentioned efficiency improvements, and that is a big part of why we do what we do. But the other part is it just makes the editing experience feel better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Something as simple as, being able to refine my midtones by adjusting both my highlights and my shadows at the same time. Once again, you can't do that with the mouse.
Yeah. And you can keep on adding, you can add as many of these as you want, right? I mean, if you want 3 big dials, you can put 3 big dials in.
That's exactly right. Around 12 modules, we start to hit the limitations of power. But honestly, if you're using profiles correctly, 12 modules is really at the edge of overkill, because that gives you 36 discrete hardware inputs, 38 if you count the 2 built into the core.
And I do love, I do find myself, the other thing that as I work, I've been finding myself changing how I have it configured. Like, oh, I don't really like it. I don't like this one next to this one. And, when you buy a piece of hardware that has it all built in, it's whatever you bought it as opposed to being able to kind of continue to refine how you interact with it.
Yeah, that comes back to the ethos of why we designed it the way that we designed it. Is basically, we believe no two creatives are exactly alike. And right. As much as a good product manager, as much as a good engineer can design hardware that fits 80% of use cases 80% of the time, the fact of the matter is that everyone's workflow evolves and everyone is unique. And just for the same reason that you would be more likely to buy a modularized camera system like a DSLR or a broadcast camera that has interchangeable lenses, we believe this is really important with the tactile tools you're using, because one day you may be on a tighter desk like I am and you want just one orbiter. One day you may get a desk upgrade or your needs may change and all of a sudden you need 3 orbiters. And it just doesn't make sense to try to throw out your entire hardware so far and rebuy something new, readjust to something new. We'd rather evolve with you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's if you don't have anything else to show, we're going to jump into the questions they're stacking up.
I'm excited for this. Let's do it.
Okay, the first one comes from Jonas Dartel in Reutlingen, and Jonas says, how easy is it for a developer to integrate your controller into their software?
Yes, this is a great question. So our SDK uses high-level WebSocket or UDP connection. So basically what it does is it sets up a local network connection over your loopback interface between Monogram Creator on one side and the app on the other side. Because it leverages Monogram Creator, you don't have to worry about the intricacies of our USB connection. You don't have to worry about the intricacies of, what if someone connects a module upside down or turn 90 degrees? All you need to do is tell us what you want to control and like what the min and max points are and your reset point and how you want to increment it. Just kind of the qualitative qualities of how you accomplish that control. And then we handle all the tough parts about managing the modular organization. It's we provide some libraries for common development languages, and overall, I believe the feedback has been it's phenomenally easy to integrate.
Next question.
Jonas Nuttall is back for a second one. With why does Monogram only have 240 events per turn? Was there a specific reason not to go with a standard 360 or 255?
Right. Okay. This is also a great question. So generally speaking, if we were going to go to 255, that's the case where we would be using like a potentiometer or something where it has a finite min point and max point. And if you have a finite min and max point, then your amount of resolution, your amount of incrementation becomes more important because you have to fit your entire range of adjustment into there. The one module that we have that does work that way is our slider module, which has 255 levels across the breadth of travel. Now, however, with the encoder, it is infinite turn. So if you turn it twice, it's 480, turn it 4 times, it's 960, so on and so forth. And the short answer for why we chose 240 was it was the highest resolution that could be accommodated by our chosen optical sensor within that space and within the design constraints. So basically, rather than trying to go to 127 and constrict it to 7-bit, we went with the highest resolution that we could given the technology.
Next question.
Is Dan H. Dan H says tactile controls. Oops, I think I just moved it to the wrong place. Tactile controls that can link together. What was the inspiration to create these devices?
Yeah, excellent question. So our CEO and founder, his name is Calvin Chu, had at first an academic interest in human-computer interaction and how people interact with technology, looking at, that a mouse and a keyboard started for things like data entry and very, we'll say, dry kind of purposes in computing and were adapted to creative technology. And then drawing upon his experiences, more so as an amateur photographer and musician, decide to ask the question, if you could build the perfect photo machine, if you could build the perfect music production machine, what would the interface for that look like? And the truth is, it doesn't have a keyboard or mouse, certainly not as the primary inputs. So it came out of the question of how do we improve interaction for creative users and kind of move beyond the legacy of the mouse and keyboard.
Next question.
Vincent Gerard at Baton Rouge, Louisiana is next, and he says, is Monogram Creative Console compatible with DaVinci Resolve?
This is also a great question. It comes up a lot. DaVinci Resolve is the one NLE that has, we'll say, the most limited compatibility with Monogram. To my earlier point of using universal control paradigms like MIDI and hotkeys, you can set it up as a pretty good edit controller in DaVinci Resolve with hotkeys. However, it's unlikely we'll ever see deeper integration because Blackmagic has vested interest in selling their control panels. And the only other control panels they support are legacy from way before they were making their own controller hardware. So without their cooperation, we don't believe that we'll become a color grading surface for them. And we'd encourage you to email them if that's something you'd really like to see.
Oh, we'll think about that. It is, it's interesting because you generally, Blackmagic has been, they generally encourage people to build on what they do. So it's an odd thing there because even when they sell hardware controllers for their switchers, for their switching software or hardware, I guess there's hardware involved in there somewhere. So they are giving you Resolve, but it is an odd thing for them to kind of that's a unique thing for Blackmagic to do, is to not give you access to the software.
Mm-hmm. And we've revisited it from a technical investigation a few times, and the answer just continues to be clear per them and per other subject matter experts that we've spoken with.
Yeah. Next question.
Comes from Tlaloc in Astoria, New York. I have wanted to use this with EOS and have had trouble. Is there an OSC? Is there any OSC support?
There is not OSC support baked in. If we're talking about kind of universal and published standards, we would be at HID, so keyboard and joystick, as well as MIDI. Now, because a lot of OSC is based over network communication, I would recommend you start with our SDK and work from there.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. Can the modules be locked together or can they be accidentally separated?
Yes, good question. They will not accidentally separate if you're using them on a tabletop. If you do want to use them on an unstable surface, you will want to put some kind of substrate on them. The other thing that we've seen, there are some folks at Discovery Channel, for example, that are using a combination of Monogram and some of the earlier Palantir hardware. They actually built bespoke cases to turn them into one contiguous layout.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm working on, I'm actually going to be sharing the one you guys sent to us to Andy Carluccio to kind of play around with, for some stuff. But as I get my own, I'm going to. I've started to play with measuring these out, because what's nice about them is they're modular, and so it's easy for me to build stuff I can 3D print. So I've been looking at building, like, once I figure out where I want them, is just to build a cage and just print out a cage that can hold them, because I want to suspend them. I found that was the one thing, is that I was like, oh, this would be really cool, and I'll put it up over here, so I can grab onto something, and then I realized I was going to need to print something. but that seems to be like something that would work pretty well. Next question.
Comes from Rupert McCrae and in Dallas. How would this be used with ZoomOSC?
That's a great question. We've just recently, I guess, started speaking with Andy in regards to something like that. Because of the OSC limitation or lack of OSC support built into Monogram Creative Console, the short answer would be, for now, to look at our SDK docs and basically translate our SDK commands into something usable via ZoomOSC. In the long term, we would like to work on something that makes it more streamlined.
I see obviously a bunch of possibilities of a lot of things that we use. I mean, so a ton of us are using Stream Decks. Like, we all have Stream Decks. We're all tying it in, and that's good. But it's one little interface that has, it's some clickety clicks that are there, and I use it a lot. So it's useful in the but having nice large interfaces that let us control things and tap on things and pull it together seems to be pretty cool. so definitely it'd be interesting to see what the integration looked like with Unity as well. I think for some of us who are doing have Unity comms, having this kind of nice big interface that lets us kind of control things would be fun as well. Next question. Oh, can't hear you, Bill.
I'm sorry, got it reversed. Douglas Carmichael's up and says, Christian Henson of Spitfire Audio fame has used your product in his workflow. How does your product connect with digital audio workstations and related music software?
Yes, excellent question. So yeah, Christian Henson has been a longtime user of Palantir and now Monogram. He's working in Logic, and then he's interfacing with, of course, Spitfire Audio instruments within Logic. Now, this is a case where our universal MIDI control actually works really, really well, because we give you the ability to freely assign any standardized MIDI message. So that's like continuous controllers, aftertouch, notes, for example. It makes it very easy to set up the Monogram console, especially the slider controls, to interface with something like a virtual instrument inside Logic, inside Cubase, etc. Basically, all he's doing is setting up his sliders for CC1, which is dynamics, CC11, which is expression, and either 19 or 21, so reverb or vibrato. And Logic basically handles the routing into Spitfire. It's all quite simple to put together.
That's really cool. I'm sorry, like that. Like, okay, that's a use case that's because then you're really creating a modular instrument. Like, you're really, it gives you the organic pieces that you need to make that happen. Interesting. Next
That's
question.
exactly right. Yeah, for music specifically, it's kind of the left hand to the right hand for composers. The right hand is, of course, inputting notes on a keyboard. The left hand is using these continuous controllers and articulation switches to make that keyboard sound more like a violin, sound more like a trumpet, more like a choir, etc. Because, of course, you just have that extra dimensionality.
The left and right hand had me wonder, can you have two controllers that are that are connected to the computer?
Not as of yet. Single device.
That'd be really cool. Next question.
Comes to us from Ken Jones in Seattle. Ken says, to take just one example, is there a limit to the number of, say, slider modules I could stick together, 2 or 3 or more?
We recommend a maximum of 12 modules connected to one core. If you want to experiment, you can try 13 or 14. And they can be of any type and in any orientation, as long as the pins make contact. So if you want to stitch together 12 sliders, you're all good.
Interesting. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is back with, would there be any way to build assignments in Monogram Creator without having the hardware connected?
Yeah, so the short answer, and from like kind of a less technical layperson's perspective, is no. If you're going to use the point and click user interface, it needs the hardware because it needs to account for the number of modules connected, their orientation, so on and so forth. Now, the long, more technical answer is that if you're using our SDK to develop an integration, you can define those inputs, you can create quick start profiles, you can create preset mappings, all without the hardware. You do just need the hardware, of course, to test it.
Next question.
Moving on to Rupert McRae. And Rupert says, can the backlight brightness be adjusted?
The backlight color can be adjusted and they can be turned off. So just to show you what I mean, let me open up Monogram Creator here. And I'm going to grab I'll grab my orbiter here. And if I bring the orbiter settings window into view, you'll see at the bottom left, we have a palette of 14 colors, including black, which turns the LED off.
There you go. Next question.
Moving on, Rupert McRae is back again with, if traveling, what's the easiest way to reassemble the modules in the correct positions?
Yes, great question. So they do have a serialization at the firmware level. So a slider is not just a slider, it is a specific named slider to the software. So I would recommend, if you're frequently disassembling them and reassembling them, just label them on the bottom of the module or on the side of the module where it's not going to be visible until you're reassembling it.
Yeah, because there's no guide to it, but yeah, that's what went through my head was just my little P-touch to kind of decide what those are. Yep. Next question.
What went through my head is take a picture with your phone. Anyway.
But to your point, though, I think what Rupert's talking about is if you have two of the same, so you really have to make sure that you ID them so that they come back. You've got two sliders or two sets of buttons. Getting them in the right order makes a difference. So yeah,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
sounds like just labeling them on, and I guess it would show up when you pop them together in the software. It would show you which one it thought it was, right?
That's exactly correct.
Because the buttons would be defined there as well.
That's exactly correct. The other thing is, of course, because they're serialized, if you connect them in the wrong order, all you need to do is reconnect them. It's going to affect all profiles. It's not like you have to correct each profile one by one.
Right. Next question.
Andy Lipnick in San Francisco says, will the wheel support scrolling and scrubbing of timeline in Pro Tools? If so, how do you set that up?
Yes, it will. I believe so. And it would be set up using keyboard shortcuts. So basically, in Monogram Creator, what you do is you would assign a keyboard shortcut to the left turn and the right turn of an orbiter or dial. And then as you turn the module, it's going to send that keyboard shortcut on a repeating basis with each tick or each event of the dial or orbiter as it's turned. That's going to move your playhead back and forth, or that's going to scroll vertically or horizontally. I will say the one caveat with Pro Tools is because we're not a Yukon device, we don't hook into the mixer, but we're great for transport control and we're great for virtual instrument control there.
Next question.
Carl Asmussen says, can MIDI sysx be encoded into the controllers for hardware instrument control, for example, use with a Roland D50?
Great question. Yeah. The short answer on that is no, it does not support sysx parameters. What it supports is program change, notes, CC, pitch bend, and aftertouch. I don't know if it's outside of the scope of your use case, but you can also use a third-party utility like MIDI pipe to translate a given MIDI command into sysx.
And I think this might have come up, but no support for companion, right? As far as a direct connection.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The BitFocus companion.
Yep.
Yeah. No, they have an SDK and we have an SDK, so something could be cooked up. We'll say.
Right. That would be super useful. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, can you integrate your modules with a program like, I believe it's Bohm's MIDI translator to translate control inputs into a MIDI output, or would you translate the network data stream to MIDI?
Right. Okay. So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're basically hoping to use the hardware inputs to generate a MIDI message or to generate another type of message from MIDI. It shouldn't even be necessary to use MIDI translator for something like that. Let me just show you our UI here for a second. I'm just going to grab a universal profile and then show you in customized view. You can see that we can output as a keyboard, as a MIDI device, or a joystick, not to mention, of course, the direct software integrations. So with that in mind, it shouldn't be necessary to use MIDI translator at all, because we can just generate all those commands that it can output natively.
Next question.
Comes from Edwin Ruiz in Chicago. What level of integration with Adobe Audition and iZotope RX is available?
Yeah, another great question. So Adobe Audition, we integrate pretty deeply with. We use two sets of their different APIs for both mixing and transport control, as well as some control over the tools in the view in there. So basic things like pan and volume, not to mention you can use Monogram to interact with some of the spectral tools, so like the spectral display or changing your healing brush size, so on and so forth. So that all basically just works. With iZotope RX, there is not a direct integration, and I'm not aware of any APIs on their side. So it would fall back to keyboard shortcuts and or MIDI. And as of course, with anything that we're not integrated with, if you have a contact on their team, we have an SDK, we'd love to send them.
Next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is back with, do modules have lights, for example, to be used as a visual mute on-off for Zoom meetings?
Yes. So yes, each module has an individual light, LED. We call them LED halos. So just to show you, if I go back to my console view here and I switch profiles, you'll see the halos changing color. Now, these are not necessarily stateful, at least not in the universal compatibility integrations. So for example, if you're using keyboard shortcuts to control Zoom, Zoom is not going to provide the feedback necessary to give you an on-off state indicator for the LED. That's a case where something like ZoomOSC and a future integration there could provide LED states.
Next question.
Mason Lancaster in Pasadena, California is up next. Has anyone tried connecting your modules with mono me gear like their grid?
Yes. So physically connecting would not be possible. Not only ours, but most modular hardware, with the exception of some Eurorack stuff, all the intramodular connections are proprietary. Now, with that being said, because it functions as a universal MIDI device, universal keyboard shortcut generator, basically it plays nice with other similar devices. You know, we test this so that it plays nice with a lot of other hardware and a lot of established standards.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, sorry about that. Dallas, could there be a USB power limitation in experimenting with larger numbers of modules? And what is the average power required for a typical kit?
Yep, that is one part of it. So you will squeeze out a few more modules if you use USB 3.0, 3.1, 3.2 Gen 1, etc. Because the kit can require, or sorry, the console can request peak, I believe, about 900 milliamps and nominally about 500 milliamps. So that is the limitation, but we'll say compared to some high draw USB devices, it's not particularly power hungry. We limit that more as a safety measure for larger layouts on our side.
And do you do each module, does it each have a different power requirement, or are they pretty even?
They're relatively even. If anything, I would say they follow their physical size, where orbiters and to a lesser extent sliders are a little more power hungry than the others. That's also where our recommended 12 and a little bit of variability comes in there. So if you're just assigning, or if you're just connecting keys and dials, you may get a few more in, but we guarantee up to 12 on most systems.
Next question.
Rupert is back, and this time he says, any support for Linux?
No support for Linux. If you want to talk directly to the USB port and put together a driver, be our guest. But we do not commercially support Linux because the kind of, we'll say, infinite number of distros and hardware permutations is just not feasible for us to support and guarantee a good experience there.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could you easily scale the Monogram technology to very large consoles like 32 or 48 plus channels?
Right. So this is a great question. We kind of touched upon the power limitation, which is where we're at currently. That puts us at 36 discrete inputs, assuming 3 inputs per module. Now, this is kind of a chance to revisit the ethos of the palette controller. Is that basically our aim is not to replace a mixing board. It's not to be a Midas 48 channel board, but it's to have a smaller subsegment of controls that augment your most used controls. So we haven't really explored that because it is a little bit outside the design ethos and what we designed for.
Next question.
Comes from Rupert McCrae again from Dallas, and he says, have you experienced any issues connecting through USB hubs, or should this be connected directly to the computer?
Yes, this is a great question. So USB hubs can cut the operating voltage down. We have seen that. And it was certainly more problematic with the previous generation of our hardware because it ran at a higher operating voltage. With Monogram, we've cut the operating voltage down so that there's a little more margin there in case your USB hub is sagging below 5 volts output. Now, with that being said, that is one more variable in the chain. A good high quality hub should not be an issue, but if you are connecting through a USB hub and you're having connectivity issues, that is where I would start the troubleshooting. Just to say we've tested with it, but as always, a direct connection is your best friend if that's a concern.
Next question.
Tlalak says, what comes with the base kit?
Great question. So there are actually 3 base kits. Now, what I have on my desk here, let me just cut to this. If I remove the sliders, right here is our middle console or the studio console. Sorry, one more. Now this is our studio console or our middle console. And this one is the one that is kind of tailored towards a photo and video workflow. We also have what's called the Traveler console. So it has this complement of hardware where we have one each of the dials, sliders, keys, and core. And then we have a very large console called the Master Console that has 3 orbiters. So the large wheel here, 3 of the dial module, 2 of the key module, and a core. And that one's built with color grading and virtual production in mind. So each console has not only a different target size and budget, but also a different target user. If you go to our website and you go onto the store page, it actually tells you the recommendations for each use case and each console.
That's great. Next question.
Tlalak was back again, and he says, does the previous iteration work with the current iteration?
Yes. That was very important to us. We invested a not insignificant amount of R&D and testing into making sure that palette gear and Monogram play nice together. The only caveat is that you need to have the new core and the new software. As long as you have the Monogram core, and as long as you're running the Monogram software, which is of course provided free with the new core, then you can mix and match the modules to your heart's content. And in fact, connecting them to the Monogram core is going to upgrade the palette gear modules in terms of performance quite a bit.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is interested in whether there are plans for native Apple Silicon support.
Long term, I believe so. I'm hesitant to give a definitive timeline here because I'm not a developer, and I know that there are dependencies that we work with. However, let me speak to where we're at with Rosetta as well. Now, because we are basically providing an assignment UI as well as sending events over WebSocket, our performance is not even remotely bottlenecked on Rosetta. So of course, long-term native is something we're looking at as we speak right now, but you're going to find that the performance bottleneck is not on the architectural side. As long as you have good APIs and as long as the app that we're connected to is performant, whether it's Rosetta or Apple Silicon, it's going to fly. We send over 100 events per second to apps that can handle it.
Next question.
Ken Jones in Seattle is up next, and Ken says, when we overload the number of modules, will we see a soft fail or do we let the smoke out?
Yeah, you'll never let the magic smoke out. The worst thing that'll happen is it'll fail to recognize a module.
There we go. Next question.
Good question. Good phrasing, Ken. Rachel Ann Clifton says, great product demonstration. Did you cover the power supplies yet? Sorry if I missed it. So thank you. Do you have one or more than one or whatever?
Yes. So all power supply is integrated into USB-C. It's just bus powered.
Next question.
Tlalak again. Have you had any users using Monogram in or with work in the cloud?
That's a good question. And that's one I can't answer definitively because of the number of different architectures out there. But just to speak at kind of at a high level, if you are connecting Monogram to, we'll say like a terminal, a client that is interfacing with the cloud, you should not have any problems. It just needs to be connected locally to a Mac or PC that's running Creator.
Next question.
Comes from Andy Lipman. Excuse me. Andy says, can you edit the graphics or text that is displayed on the core module?
Yes, absolutely. So if I just go back to Monogram Creator here, you'll see that in each of my profiles, it kind of comes supplied with an icon for the corresponding app. If I click on that, it's just going to open up a Finder window where I can choose a new icon. As well, if I want to change the naming of that profile, all I need to do is double click on the tab and I can change this from Develop Basic to, let's just call this Retouch. And there we go.
Next question.
Comes out of the panel from Rupert McRae again. This time, can the configurations be backed up and transferred to a different computer?
Yes, absolutely. So they are somewhat hardware dependent, where they're going to work best if you load them into a similar console to what they were saved from. But if you're moving your profile between multiple computers, it will work perfectly.
Next question.
Rupert McRae back with, do commands have to be sent to the local loopback address, or can they be sent over a network to a different host?
Yes, I believe that's possible. When we were beta testing Unreal Engine, there were a few enterprising folks that basically changed the WebSocket or UDP connection so that instead of being pointed to localhost, it was pointed to another local IP address. And from my understanding, it worked perfectly.
While you were talking, I was thinking about Unreal Engine. You know, I've been spending a lot of time in MetaHuman, you know, and playing with it, and I realized there's a ton of keystrokes there. So you could probably just use the universal control to tie that in, which would be useful. Anyway, next question.
Rupert is back. This time, does the UI have a dark mode?
No, it does not. And now I will say one mitigating factor. Aware of the fact that we didn't have a UI dark mode and aware of the fact we wanted to expend developer time and resources elsewhere, that preview mode that I showed you guys before, that is only in dark mode so that it doesn't sear your retinas off when you are looking for a hint of what your assignments are. So just to show you what I'm talking about again, if I press and hold any of the keys on the core module, you'll see that it pops up all my assignments. That was intentionally done as a dark mode so that it doesn't ruin your color acuity and doesn't, isn't too bright when you're working in a dark app like Lightroom.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Bitwig Studio, and they've got a link there, offers full Java and JavaScript scriptability for control surfaces. Could there be a way to send the surface graphics and color information from another application?
Great question. I will be perfectly honest here and say that I don't quite understand what the use case is. So I'll just kind of speak to what we do at a high level. You can set up a JavaScript integration, no problem, where it's sending over commands from Monogram to Bitwig, or it's sending back stateful feedback from Bitwig to Monogram. What it's not going to do is send over like our entire creator UI and assignment window into Bitwig so that you can use it in there. That's going to live separately. The other thing I can speak to is that I know we have had a few users that have set it up just via basic MIDI compatibility with Bitwig and have reported good results.
And I think this is the, we got to, they keep on coming in. Next question.
Yeah. Gary Harper, Gary Harper in London in the UK says, is there any compatibility or issues with ScreenFlow 10?
Certainly no issues I'm aware of, because compatibility with ScreenFlow 10 would be very simple and would be based on hotkeys in absence of a direct integration.
Next question.
Robert Soji is up next, and he says, are there hardware or software templates available? For example, a favorite setup for Final Cut Pro editing or Logic Pro 10 use?
Yes, great question. So with each of our integrations, of which Final Cut Pro is one, and it was developed by Command Post, there are a series of quick start profiles that are supplied. So if I just jump over into Creator here, let's try that one more time. There we go. If I just jump over into Creator here, and I go to my my Final Cut profile, you'll see that as I expand the bottom drawer here, it's going to give me an editing profile as well as color grading profiles. Now for Logic, Logic is supported via universal MIDI. So the setup is a little less plug and play, and it requires you to map MIDI CCs. With that being said, folks like Christian Henson, as well as another user from our community whose name escapes me right now, have put out amazing articles and videos showing you how to set it up. Shouldn't take more than 10-15 minutes.
That's great. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas is back. How would we receive software updates, auto or manual? And could there also sometimes be firmware updates required?
Yep. So speaking to the software updates, first of all, those are delivered via a prompt when you first open or reopen Creator. You do have the option to decline those. Obviously, some folks want to stay with a fixed setup and don't want to risk us breaking things or moving things around while they're on a production. So those can be freely declined or freely updated, and they are provided free of charge. We'll say about once a month, give or take, depending on what's required. Firmware updates are delivered through the software update. So once you update the software, you'll get a prompt. There's a new firmware available. It's flashed to the core in about 5 minutes. Once again, you can freely decline those. The only time they're going to be explicitly required is to enable new features. So for example, when we first shipped Monogram, it didn't have MIDI aftertouch and didn't have MIDI pitch bend. So we provided a firmware update to add those capabilities about a month after it launched.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back again with, could you easily get Mackie control data out of Creator to use with software that requires it?
Great question. I will say we haven't tried, partially because my understanding of it, at least, is that MCU is proprietary standard and has licensing associated with it. Hopefully I'm not incorrect on that. With that said, no MCU compatibility built into it. If you want to put something together with a MIDI translator, MIDI pipe, etc., go nuts. Just it's proprietary, so that's why it's not included.
Next question.
Luck is back, and this time he asks, is there a Slack channel or other community forum for people developing with the software development kit?
Yes, great question. So we host a community forum that is a little more all-encompassing than SDK developers. It's integrated with our help center so that when you search for an answer, you get not only our help documentation, but also other relevant discussions. So that's one option. We, of course, have pretty good email support. I'm one of the folks that helps out on there from time to time, as well as I know we have a community Discord. I'll have to follow up with a link to that, but it's run by one of our customers, actually, but our team chimes in occasionally on there.
I'm always curious, how big is Monogram? How many people work with you?
We're about 12 full-time right now, and then we have a few contract and co-op staff. We're, of course, right next to University of Waterloo, so we have some amazing young talent coming out of the university that we either hire on a term basis or that join our team as needed.
That's great. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael and says, would you ever think of making IP-related versions of your modules for outdoor or harsh environment use? So, yeah,
that's an excellent question. Honestly, not something that we have explored for the near future. One thing I can speak to now, it is not as robust as an IP certification, but for example, when we were developing our Monogram hardware, we chose not to go with a trackball because they're very prone to dust and debris getting in there in dusty and set environments. And we actually went with Orbiter, where the inner pressure plate is based on a magnetic sensor and therefore won't be taken down by dust. Also, anecdotally, I'm very clumsy and I've put a couple cups of coffee through my various palette and Monogram consoles with mostly okay results. But IP
Field tested.
certification, we'll call that a long-term project. I'm not aware of anything in the works for that.
I was going to ask about that because there is, I mean, I do like the pressure plate, but I was like, oh, it would be really nice to have a trackball. Like there's an organic nature that. Have you guys just decided that's not in the cards? You're not interested?
Certainly not for the short term, and I'll tell you why. Is we know that a lot of folks have muscle memory built up on trackballs, so we did really heavily beta test this and really did heavily validate Orbiter. But there are a couple kind of amazing advantages of the way that we've done it that convinced us that it's the right way to go forward. One, as I said, is the greater robustness. The other thing is because you're varying the amount of adjustment via time and pressure and direction and not having to constantly spin it, it's actually easier on the wrist for long editing sessions, because instead of making radial movements with my wrist on the trackball, I'm just pressing and I'm just making fine variations to pressure and direction. So it's kind of like the throttle on a plane or a car. It's easier to drive somewhere than it is to bike somewhere. Just the same as it's easier just to press and hold than it is to be consistently changing that adjustment on a trackball. We think the adjustment time's worth it.
Next question.
Rupert McRae back with, what is the warranty or RMA process in case of failure?
Yes. So one of the advantages here, of course, is that it is modular. So if a part fails on you, generally speaking, we don't, after a basic troubleshooting to make sure it's not software, make sure it's not easily solved, we just send you out a new module and a return label so we can get the faulty one back, figure out what went wrong. That is 1 year as is included with the hardware. There is the option to purchase additional coverage similar to an AppleCare where it covers 3 years plus accidental damage. That's an additional fee, but it's not much.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones is impressed and says he wants to know where you learned your skills as a presenter.
Oh, that's very kind. A million Zoom calls with customers, I guess.
That's good. That's good. It's been this is you get peppered really quickly here. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas is back with, are you impacted by the global chip shortage?
Not yet, and not much. I believe our hardware team is working to mitigate the effects of that long term. So far, we've been okay. So far, our problem, and I don't mean this as a brag, just all honesty, is we've had trouble keeping our production batches up with demand. We've been taken aback, especially by the music market folks. We've sold out of travelers and sliders faster than we ever would have imagined. But not a lot of problems with the chip shortage.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back with, would you ever think of providing a text-based assignment format for easy sharing and programmatic creation of assignments?
Funny enough, we do have that. It's a little rough and ready, so it's hidden under a feature flag, and it's not. It doesn't show up in Creator by default. Let me make sure that I've got it up and running on mine, though. Let's just grab a profile here, and perfect. All right, so let's go to manual entry, and you can see that I've got some JSON code here that basically just describes the all the different attributes of my assignment. So if you cross-reference this with our SDK, or if you learn it the way I did, which is assigning stuff in the UI and then reverse engineering it in the manual entry mode, it actually allows you to do more than is possible in the UI because it bypasses some safety checks. So we do a few things to save the average user from themselves. But if you're comfortable taking that risk and assigning things that may or may not work, you can also do a lot of stuff that does work and would not be possible to support in a UI.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again, and he says, I noticed you're using an Electro Voice RE20. What made you choose that mic?
Great. Pardon me. Great question. So off-axis noise rejection was the biggest one. I was using a Blue Yeti, and it was absolutely miserable in anything other than a really nicely treated room, which I do not have the luxury of having, certainly not during COVID. I love it. The only thing I don't like about it is it doesn't have enough gain, and I have to buy a cloud lifter sooner rather than later. But it's a great mic. It doubles as a hammer. Tom York uses it, and it rejects everything but what's right in front of it.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. What headphones are you using for monitoring?
Now you guys are not going to like me. You guys are not going to like me after this. They're Bose Sound Sport.
They're fun. They're good.
Just,
Good little,
yeah,
good
they're
little
my
headphones.
gym earbuds, and if I need something unobtrusive, they're good for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
And Doug is back with, what specific language are you using for the firmware in the modules and in the software for the host?
Oh boy. I will be perfectly honest with you. I'm not sure on the firmware, on the embedded side. I can speak to Creator is a mix of C++ and Java, sorry, JavaScript. There's a big difference. And our SDK is relatively language agnostic. So you can plug it into C#, C++, JavaScript, Lua, doesn't matter.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas, here on the panel. Are you seeing mainly customers working from home, or are most of your customers in studios or offices?
Yeah, this is a great question. I don't interface with folks, we'll say, in enough volume to give you anything quantitatively, but anecdotally I can say that most of the folks that I've spoken with either have a home office or are on kind of a hybrid workflow. Because of the capabilities of our product, because of its pricing and so on and so forth, it really does kind of occupy a solidly prosumer to pro positioning. So a lot of the folks we work with are freelancers or are part of small production teams.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, second to the last. Where do we download the software development kit?
Yep. docs.monogramcc.com, or just shoot us an email and we'll get you pointed in the right direction.
And last question.
Comes to us from our friend Tony Mobley in Newman, Georgia. Use case for special needs adults and children. Have you considered that?
This is a fantastic question, and it's not something that we have explored in depth. However, I know we've had some folks reach out asking about, for example, a Monogram as an assistive device because of the depth of software hooks in it. One of the things that we even prototyped but never brought to market was a 3.5 mil plug built into a module so that you could plug in an a switch control for accessibility control, but use our hardware drivers with it. Pardon me again, sorry. So for example, that's something we're looking at as a long-term project. Honestly, the barrier to entry for that market is so high, because when you're working with vulnerable populations that don't only need this as a quality of life thing for creative work, but literally it's central to how they communicate and interact with the world, you have to approach it in a completely different way. And that's a future project for us.
Andy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys. This has been amazing.
I think this is now the ultimate, like, 1 hour. If you want to know what Monogram is and what it does, I think we got an incredible amount of information, and you just knocked it out of the park. So thank you so much.
Right on. Thank you so much, guys, and thanks everyone for the fantastic questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to the to our producers who are all watching and asking those great questions. It was really, really great work. You really pulled a lot of that stuff out. And to our panelists for great conversation, of course, in the first and second hour. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And now we're going to jump. I'll either see all of you tomorrow, or I will see you, which we're going to tomorrow's education, remember. So we'll have 2 hours of Q&A and then 2 hours of education. So so it's a kind of not the long day the way we've had the long Saturdays, but still pretty long. So anyway, so stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all tomorrow morning or in just a minute in the post show. All right.